This video is part of the Director Project, a monthly playlist where creators from all across YouTube make a bunch of video essays analyzing a chosen director. For November 2020, we are looking at one of my personal favorites, the great Steven Spielberg. So make sure to check out the other videos in the playlist, and if you have a video you'd like to have included, just tweet at CultPopsure on Twitter. Now, without further ado, on with the show. If I were to ask the average horror junkie or cinephile who the masters of horror are, a few names would probably come up. George Romero, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, etc. Amazing filmmakers who helped shape and define the horror genre into what it is today. But there's one name you will probably never hear listed amongst the great horror directors that I feel deserves some consideration, and that is Steven Spielberg. Now, it is totally understandable that no one thinks of Steven Spielberg as a horror filmmaker, considering he's only ever made one movie that people categorize as a horror film, and that is Jaws. Unless, of course, you believe the theories that he secretly ghost-directed Poltergeist. But he has denied this, as well as the film's director Tobe Hooper and most of the cast, so for the purposes of this video, we're just gonna count Jaws as one true horror film. And even Jaws, by many horror junkie standards, is more of a blockbuster than a true horror film. But it is a horror film. It may not be as dark or spooky as your average scary movie, but there are plenty of tense, terrifying, and yes, horrifying scenes. Like this.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chum some of this shit.
Maybe I'm alone in this, but I jumped out of my skin the first time I saw that scene, and in my opinion, it might just be one of the best jump scares in film history. Steven Spielberg is not always the nice, family-friendly director people like to label him as. Sure, sometimes he makes a movie like E.T. or the BFG, but he kicked off his career in earnest with a scene of a little boy being devoured by a shark. He knows how to properly craft a scare. In fact, he seems to relish it. After filming Jaws, Spielberg decided he wanted to have one more good scare for the film. So, spending $3,000 of his own money, he reshot the scene where Hooper finds Ben Gardner's body in the wrecked boat, refilming the scene in a producer's swimming pool with powdered milk and a tarp being utilized to replicate the dark and murky water of the ocean. Spielberg would often pop into theaters right around this point in the movie to hear the shrieks of the audience. Spielberg would never again direct what most people consider a straight-up horror film, but this love of scaring the crap out of his audience has endured for his entire career. Horror may not be his preferred genre, but he masterfully employs dread, tension, and jumps in the vast majority of his films. In fact, it's how his career began. And I'm not talking about Jaws, I'm referring to Duel. A made-for-TV movie, Duel is a masterclass in tension about a mysterious semi-truck hounding a random driver trying to run him off the road and kill him. Rather than make your run-of-the-mill, high-speed action thriller, Spielberg transformed Duel into a monster movie, with the semi-truck being nearly anthropomorphized as the main villain of the film, as we never actually see its driver. It's almost like the truck has a mind of its own. In fact, at the end of the film, producers wanted the truck to blow up. But Spielberg insisted that it die, roaring like a wounded animal. In fact, he reused that roar in Jaws as the noise the shark makes when it blows up. These two films are two sides of the same coin, films about the everyman fighting against an enormous leviathan that's hell-bent on destroying him. They are monster films every bit as terrifying and intense as horror classics like Alien, Predator, or The Thing. And they were far from the last monster films of Spielberg's career. When I was a kid, I thought Jurassic Park was a horror film. I mean, what else do you call a movie about giant dinosaurs eating people? As I grew into an adult, I changed my mind, as most do, recognizing the film has much more of a tone of wonder and adventure that are common amongst the Spielberg classics. Jurassic Park is more fun than scary. Or at least that was my opinion until I revisited the film in 2013 when it was re-released in IMAX and 3D. I had only seen the film on tiny TVs up to this point in my life and honestly was so used to the famous T-Rex scene that I found it kind of boring. But re-experiencing this moment in IMAX and 3D, it was honestly like I had never seen it before. Suddenly I noticed how Spielberg removed all music from this scene, letting the rain, vibration of giant footsteps, the whimper of children, and the roars of a gigantic beast serve as the only score, ratcheting up the tension and terror. Suddenly, I was right there with the kids, faced with the terrifying prospect of an apex predator trying to get into the vehicle. And as the T-Rex exited its enclosure and roared, with 3D in full effect and the IMAX surround sound booming, my brain and body suddenly forgot I was watching a movie, and for just a brief second, all I could register was that there was a giant animal in front of me, and I felt utter terror, like that real, visceral fear in the pit of your stomach. It was honestly the greatest theatrical experience of my life, and I relished every moment of it. Spielberg has an uncanny way of building dread. Take the velociraptors in Jurassic Park as a prime example. We open the film with this scene, demonstrating their deadliness. Then, in this humorous scene, Alan uses a velociraptor claw to traumatize this child, explaining in gruesome detail the terrible death someone might experience at the hands of a velociraptor.
The point is, you are alive when they stop to eat you.
Then, once again, another demonstration of the unseen horror of these things as they devour an entire cow. Look at that, they even damaged the equipment that lowered the cow in. So, by the time our heroes decide that they have to leave their nice, safe, locked building to walk on foot through dinosaur-infested jungle to another building to turn the power back on, the stakes are pretty well set, which makes this scene terrifying.
Clever girl.
Which leads us to this.
Mr. Hammond, I think we're back in business.
Which leads us to discover what happened to poor Samuel L. Jackson, which leads us to yet another jump scare. You know, come to think of it, Spielberg is really good at jump scares. Spielberg keeps ratcheting up the tension and the danger, leaving the characters and us utterly frantic. In fact, the entire last act of Jurassic Park never really lets up. The rest of the film is them being stalked by these things, just narrowly avoiding death at every turn. Again, the tone is that of an action-adventure film, but honestly, this film has more scares, dread, and creepy moments than most horror films that I have seen. Spielberg, without question, seems to have a love for horror and freaking out his audience. Look at Indiana Jones and its constant use of horror imagery. What else do you call faces melting off but horror? Or someone shriveling up and disintegrating? Or the various creepy crawlies constantly terrorizing our heroes? Or just take a look at the entirety of Temple of Doom. This whole movie is dark and rough with a mean streak that the others don't possess. We have Indy being tortured with a voodoo doll, possessed by some sort of evil entity after being forced to drink blood, henchmen being crushed, eaten by crocodiles, children enslaved, and let's not forget the human sacrifice scene where the bad guy rips the beating heart out of this man's chest, after which he is lowered into magma, burning alive somehow without his freaking heart. Like, that's freaking horror, man. Scenes like this are scattered throughout Steven Spielberg's career. For instance, David straddling the line between adorable and unsettling in AI, or the horrors of the flesh fair in the same movie. This creepy scene in Minority Report where Tom Cruise gets his eyes removed. Then there's the abduction scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a classically put together spooky sequence. Or when Spielberg put his dread skills to more somber use in Schindler's List as women are marched off to the showers. E.T. is a whimsical children's film, but scenes like this one were obviously intended to spook the kids in the audience. In fact, one could make the argument that Spielberg films often serve as kids' first introduction to creepy and disturbing imagery like in Indiana Jones. And super hot take here, when he recreated scenes from The Shining in Ready Player One, I think some of the scenes are more scary than the originals, particularly his version of the hedge maze scene. And again, while he did not direct it, Spielberg did write the script for Poltergeist and produced it. So many of the imaginative and creepy scenes from that film have Spielberg's fingerprints all over them. And in addition to all of these, there's another Spielberg film that I consider a horror movie that most don't, that being War of the Worlds. Bleaker and far more unsettling than the lion's share of Spielberg films, War of the Worlds explores the feeling of paranoia and fear in the wake of 9/11, portraying fear-stricken people doing anything, terrible things to survive. It might just have been my first foray into horror, and most people don't really consider it a horror movie. But like, how can you not? This is a movie where the first big action scene is watching people get disintegrated left and right while our hero gets caked in their cremated remains. It's a movie where a little girl watches hundreds hundreds of dead bodies float down a river, where we watch aliens suck blood from human bodies and then spray it into the atmosphere, creating a web of crimson vines over our world. This is the movie where a horde of people swarm our hero's car like a pack of zombies, one guy prying the window apart with his bare hands. It's a movie where the main characters get stuck in a bunker with a deranged lunatic who our hero decides to murder in cold blood with a shovel to ensure the safety of his daughter. This is far more like The Walking Dead than your average Spielbergian adventure. And let's not forget this scene, which is one of the most tense things I have ever watched. It's basically a remake of the kitchen scene in Jurassic Park where the main characters are avoiding the searching eye of an evil creature by ducking around corners, except there's something more unsettling about this scene. It's quieter and slower. The buzzing of the probe with its snake-like form and giant eye and shape just sets you on edge. It feels very, well, alien. And with the added element of Tim Robbins' character almost sabotaging everything, it's just intense and masterful. Honestly, War of the Worlds is not perfect, but it shows a darker side to Spielberg that we rarely see. Coupled with John Williams' amazingly intense score, the result is something truly horrifying, in my opinion, underrated. I don't know if Spielberg will ever direct a true horror film again. In recent years, he's skewed far more towards historical dramas, but I hope he does, because while his horror films are few and far in between, he truly has a talent for creating tension, dread, and horrifying moments, and I'd love to see some more of that. Spielberg will probably never be inducted into the horror greats, but for me, he was one of my first introductions to the dark, the scary, the macabre. He's made my skin crawl. He's made me jump. He's had me gripping the armrests of my seat through pure tension. And for that reason, for me at least, Spielberg will always be a master of horror.